So this Yardman 42-inch rider came into the shop today, wouldn't turn over. After checking it out, I found the carburetor inlet needle was bad, allowing gas to flood the cylinder head and contaminate the oil in the crankcase, thus causing it to hydrolock. That's the downside to gravity-fed gas tank. If the carb inlet needle doesn't seat, it will allow fuel to flood the cylinder head and the crankcase. So this project will require a carburetor rebuild and an oil change. I'll show you how I know that the float needle's bad. You have a thumb pump connected to the fuel inlet and do a pop-off test. When you do this, it should hold 7 to 10 psi without any leak down whatsoever. But as you can see, this holds no pressure. So I know the float needle is bad. And it's going to require two things for this rebuild. One is a Briggs float bowl gasket, and that's part number 698781, and a Briggs part number 696136 float needle, which I'll show you a little bit when I take this thing apart. This is a common Nikki carburetor. Comes on many Briggs single-cylinder engines. Half-inch wrench will remove the anti-backfire solenoid, and a Phillips screwdriver will remove the float bowl. I've already drained the fuel in this carburetor, so be sure you do that before you take it all apart. Let's take a look at the inside of this now and see what we've got. The float bowl gasket kit comes with two parts. One's small O-ring, the other is the molded bowl gasket. Small O-ring, as you can see, is damaged on one side and it needs to be replaced. I'll take a quick look at that. This carburetor comes with a one-piece gasket. It's molded just like you see it. Comes off all in one piece, and that's going to be replaced in the kit, so we can set that aside. We're not going to need that. Next, we'll separate the float bowl from the float, and we'll set that aside for now. So now we need to remove the float pin from the float. That's what holds the float needle in place. And there you go. As you can see it, that's the culprit right there. It's damaged on the end, whatever that rubber or Viton tip is made out of there. It's damaged, and so that needle needs to be replaced. That's what will be done in this kit. I'll show you that needle when we get it. I don't have it right now, but when it comes in, we'll put this video back on for you. But here's one thing you might want to take a note of. That's the jet right there. It'll push out from the bottom side, but if you lose that jet when disassembly and you put it back together without it in there, your motor will not run. That jet's held in with a small O-ring, and I'll put a link to where you can purchase those O-rings in the video below. Overall, this carburetor looks pretty clean. There's small holes around the carburetor. You can clean them, shoot them with spray carb. But one thing I'd like to point out to you here is the emulsion tube. That's this brass part here. The emulsion tube's got some very fine little holes in there, and sometimes they will varnicize and get plugged up with varnish. You'll put this thing back together, and it'll act like it doesn't want to run. So what I do is I just use a tip cleaning set. These are primarily designed for welders, but find one that's really small and find the one that fits, and then go through each one of those holes in the emulsion tube and rod them out real good. Back and forth. You'll be able to see that they're on both sides of the emulsion tube, And just make sure you just clean them out and then shoot some carburetor cleaner through them. And that should pretty well take care of that problem on the rebuild. So now all we have to do is just reassemble it with new parts. As soon as I get the float needle back in, I'll show you what part number that is, and we'll put it all back together. So you can see that the new gaskets are in place. The old gaskets are still on the table there. One thing to point out though, just a little detail. This is where the O-ring goes. It comes in the kit. Just fits on that little protrusion right there. And your bowl gasket, of course, is molded all in one piece. And if you'll notice that there are some little grooves in the base plate there, and they just pop into those little grooves, fit down in there real nicely. And then the outside edge of that bowl ring that you see there, it's designed to slide over the outside edge just a little bit. That way when you put it back together, your bowl will seal up against that ring. That's what it's designed to do. Once you have the gaskets positioned correctly, it's just time to put the plastic base plate back onto the carburetor body. And notice that there's a small hole there. The emulsion tube's in the center. Only go on one way. Snap that into place. And then notice that the bowl ring runs around the outside edge of that plastic base plate. And that's what your float bowl will seal to when you put the Phillips screws back in. But before we do that, we're going to have to put on the float and the new needle. I'll show you how to do that next. The new float needle come in. So now it's ready to reassemble everything. That Briggs and Stratton part number for that needle is a 696136. It's called a valve float needle. And this is what it looks like inside the package here. It's a plastic needle with a rubber tip on it, as you can see there. I'm going to go ahead and take it out of the bag, and after we've taken it out of the bag, we'll compare the two so that you can see, and I don't know if you can see that in this video or not, but this has a nice sharp point on it. If you compare the two together, you'll see that the old one is damaged on the end, and so therefore it wasn't given a good seal. This one's got a nice sharp point on it, and it should really do the trick for us, seal everything up factory new again. So let's put it all back together. Let's hang it there on the float, because that's where it goes. And once we hang it on the float, we can set it in place, and we can put the float pin back in. So that's how that goes. Set it down in there nice and easy, and then we'll just put the float pin back in and holds everything in place. Now it's time to reassemble the float bowl to the body of the carburetor, but before I do that, I'm going to put just a little bit of lubricant in the fuel inlet side, just a quick squirt. Then I'm going to show you how to do a pop-off test. Remember, we did that in the initial part of this video, and we'll show you how to do it again to show you that the actual problem was the float needle. And so we'll do that here in just a minute. So let's put it all back together. Line up the float bowl with the carburetor body. Drop in those two Phillips screws and snug everything up. Just remember here, you don't need a gorilla grip. You just need to snug those screws to the base of the carburetor. Remember that your bowl gasket is doing the sealing here and not your grip. Next, it's time to put on the anti-backfire solenoid. Wipe off the end of it there so that you don't get dirt inside the carburetor. Spin it down, make sure you've got it threaded correctly, and then just use a 1/2-inch wrench to snug it down. That's all you need. No overkill required. And then we'll hook up the pressure pump, thumb pump there, and we'll see if it'll hold pressure. Now, if you recall, I already put a slight amount of lubricant in there to wet the needle so that it will simulate having fuel on the wet end of the tip there. You always want to check them wet. And so we'll pump it up, see if it'll hold 5 to 7 pounds of pressure, and if it does, then we know that we have that problem fixed. So let's take a look. Yes, as you can see on the gauge, holding 7 pounds of pressure very nicely. So we know that we fixed that problem. Fuel is not going to leak back down into the cylinder head, back down into the crankcase, contaminating the oil. So I hope this video has helped someone to rebuild this particular carburetor and perhaps even solve this particular problem.